Okay, so again, like I said, welcome to the Winnipeg.net user group, everyone. My name is David West, but I'll get into that in a little bit. Today we're doing a presentation on Visual Studio. I put it in little brackets because the software is actually called code most of the time, so it's really horrible to Google solutions for this thing. But a lot of people call it Visual Studio Code because of that problem. And it's the Visual Studio for everyone, and I'm going to talk about this. I think it's it's actually replaced Visual Studio for me, given I didn't use it all that heavily, but I use it primarily for all of my coding now. And that's whatever language, whatever framework I want to use, I use this one. So this is based on actually version 0.10.3. So it's in official beta as of about 2 weeks ago. And they just released a quick patch. So it's actually 10.3. But again, not a big change, just some stability changes. But yeah, so we'll get into that. Oh, wrong laptop. Let's start with this one. OK. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself to give you guys kind of an idea of the story about me. So I went to the University of Manitoba many years ago, and I was going to be a doctor because that's what is great. And you know what? Being a doctor is really, really hard. So that just out the window. And I actually got a whole bunch of bad marks because I wasn't going to class and blah. And then I also spent a lot of time playing video games. And so I thought, video games are on computers as well, so I might as well go and take a computer course of some sort. So like the average person, I signed up for the wrong computer course, and I ended up doing a programming course, not the easy A, and I did Hello World, and that just blew my mind. And I actually sat in front of my computer for a good 3 hours just changing the string of Hello World and making my computer say different things. It sounds so lame, but I was like, no, come over here. Look at this. It says Hello Dave now. And that took me like 30 minutes to recompile because I forgot a semicolon. So I was like, this is amazing. And that's led me to go down this line. So I did Java at the early beginning, but then I got into Microsoft.NET in university, did a lot of UI work and user experience stuff, and started with WPF. But then that led me down the line of ASP.NET, because WPF and Silverlight as well didn't really pan out all that well for the company I was working for. So I ended up doing some work in HTML, JavaScript, and specifically around Internet Explorer 9. Now my work around IE9 was, hey, you know what sucks? Internet Explorer. And I did a lot of web talks on how it's getting better, but and then they made me, from there I did a lot of presentations on it, and they made me an MVP for trash talking IE9 a lot, and Microsoft said, that's pretty good, we should bring you on board. I'm like, all right. With my MVP status, I ended up going down the line of joining a whole group of people across Canada. We're called the Western Devs, and it's a whole network of us, and we're getting some traction. We do a podcast and stuff like that, and we talk about a bunch of stuff. But I'm the one that's kind of the weird guy out now because I don't even talk about anything related to .NET anymore. I'm actually more of a Node.js developer. And as to spice things up a little bit, I'm actually a full-time Java programmer now. So that's my thing. Currently, I'm actually working on Oracle Forms, which is all kinds of weird. I don't even know what that's about, but that's what my real job is. And again, I'm still doing the .NET user group. So that's a little bit about who I am. If you want to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me on my blog. My Twitter is @DavidWest. It's very original. Got 2 S's in my last name, and I'm questions@davidwest.com if you want to email me something. And again, you can always find me at the Western Devs group here. We tweet and we podcast and we do all kinds of stuff. So definitely check that out. All of our blogs, a lot of great knowledge kind of accumulates there. So definitely check us out. So that being said, why am I interested in Visual Studio Code? And that's kind of where I'm going to bring this together. Because I actually use VS Code at work. And like I said, I'm a Java programmer and a Node.js programmer when I'm not doing Java. So the point of this presentation is to try to clear up some of the cloudiness that comes around Visual Studio Code. More specifically, I want to explain what Visual Studio Code is and actually show you it. We're going to see a lot of demos about what you can do with it and its extensibility and all that. But I really want to answer what Visual Studio Code is not. Personally, I would love to see this thing kill Visual Studio. I'm not a big fan of Visual Studio because it makes my laptop really slow and bad. Good example is I booted it up just before the presentation, and that was a 10-minute endeavor for my laptop. So, I guess add an update or something, I don't know. But we're also going to see some other cool stuff because like I said, I'm not primarily a C# developer, but all the tools and things you're going to see are used in the .NET world quite extensively. Like I said, I focus a lot on JavaScript, Node, and different things like that. So this all kind of applies in the whole ecosystem. But that's where the point is. So here's our agenda. WTF is Visual Studio Code. WTF is a task. And we're going to talk about that on a general concept and how this integrates into VS Code. WTF is an extension. So we're going to talk about that as well, and why that's so critical, and how this kind of works in Visual Studio Code in its current form, because they just came out with extensions as of 2 weeks ago with version 0.10. And last but not least, I'm going to kind of do a Q&A at the end. So if you guys don't have questions, I actually have some questions for you guys, so it'll go back and forth. So it's better that you ask questions, because I will interrogate you afterwards and make you feel very uncomfortable, and it'll be great, for me at least. And like I said, we're filming the whole thing, so all of your uncomfortableness will be recorded. But any questions? Is there anything that you guys wanted to see, or any specific questions you wanted answered today? That's actually one of the benefits of coming to the presentation rather than watching it on YouTube. Is there anything specific about Visual Studio Code that you wanted to know about? How about this? How many people here have used Visual Studio Code yet? Okay, so 3. That's good. That's actually most of the people. Most people say like, oh, you mean Atom? I'm like, no, I don't mean Atom. Does anyone know what Atom is? Yeah, see, there you go. See, everyone, that's trendy because GitHub made it. But no, Visual Studio Code is actually, I prefer it, not because I'm an MVP, but because it actually works a little bit better for my needs. So let's start with WTF is code to kind of educate the whole room, and you all can learn about it. So let's at code.visualstudio.com. It's pretty straightforward. It's actually the website where you can find all your information about it. It's part of the Visual Studio family. It is an open source code editor. So first of all, it's very similar to Atom because it was built on the Electron platform. So Node.js, if you want to do an offline windowed application that hosts a little, think of it as a container that hosts all of Node.js. It's cross-platform. And GitHub released this source code into the ether. So if you wanted to make a little HTML web app, you can actually take that web app, essentially, put it into this Electron container, and then poof, you have an offline application using JavaScript on the front end and the back end and everything. It's really, really easy to pick up. GitHub made that. They built Atom with it. So if you've seen Atom, Visual Studio Code's going to look very familiar to you because it's the same style. And it's cross-plat, like I said. And it's also open source, purely open source. The whole thing is up on GitHub. And it's built on an open source platform, which is hosted by GitHub. So the whole thing is just out there, which is very weird when you're talking about Visual Studio. I'm pretty confident Visual Studio is not going open source. Maybe you guys know differently, but I'm pretty confident I don't think it's a matter of they don't want to release it. I think they're just ashamed of showing people that code because, man, that thing has got to be like 20 years of hot garbage, like just kind of sitting there fermenting.
I think that Slack is built, the Slack client.
The Slack client is also built into that. Yep, it is. A lot of apps built in it. That leads me to this other piece, that it's completely cross-platform. That's critical to why this thing even exists. But it works on Windows, Linux, and Mac, and that's weird. Because the thing is built to work with Node.js and C#. So it is kind of a weird situation, and we're not seeing this from a lot. Like, we're seeing Visual Studio and Microsoft in general kind of give up this Windows-only mentality and go down the line of like, look, if you want to build software, we got the thing you want to buy from us. And that's pretty much the whole philosophy. They are making it easy for all of us and our companies to give them money, which is a great plan, I think, for a business. So why would you hold on to Windows when you can just make it cross-plat when it comes down to coding? As I mentioned, it's also language agnostic. Now, I said it's focused on JavaScript, Node.js, and C#, but it does work with everything. And I'm actually going to do a Java demo later, and that's going to be all kinds of weird. Because like I said, I use Gradle and JUnit and stuff with Visual Studio Code. It's all backwards. Everything's broken with the stuff we're going to see. But again, big native support for C# and Node.js and TypeScript and JavaScript. Does anyone here do JavaScript programming? Yeah, there we go. This is really helpful. Does anyone do TypeScript programming? How about that? Yeah, a little bit? They're both really good. They actually kind of keep them in the same run. We're going to see a little bit of both today, and we're going to see some Node.js as well. And I'm going to tell you the story about why you're not going to see any C# today. There's actually a really good story, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So what does this thing provide? Well, it provides support for multiple languages, debugger integration. So there's actually an integrated debugger in the editor, and we're going to see that. Has Git integration, so if you are uncomfortable with the command line, it actually gives you a lot of the core functionality of Git inside of the IDE, and it has a really nice file compare tool. So I'm very familiar with the Git command line from, like, I guess, intro level. I'm very comfortable with terminal though. And this actually, I like using it because it makes things pretty easy. So it does allow for custom tasks. Oh, yes, Adam.
Do you know if you can lace it in to use as your compare tool in Git command line? Like, can you launch a diff from command line? If so, then you can probably lace it in.
Can I use, so the question is, can I launch a git diff from the command line and show it up in
code.
In code?
Usually kdiff3 is like your
The answer is yes. I'll show you an example of how we actually get that working, because I got some weird wonky stuff going on with Java and Gradle. So it's the same style of thing, so you'll be able to, it's really easy to build. So custom tasks. So anyone use, what's your task manager that you guys use? Gulp, does anyone use Gulp or Grunt?
Gulp.
Got a little bit of that? There's Jake, Make, Rake. What else we got? Is there anything else? Fake. There's Fake for the F# guy in the back. That's good. All those task runners, Gradle, Maven, Ant, all those can work with this. There's some native support for a very specific few, specifically Gulp and Grunt, and Jake for that, the JavaScript folks. It's built in. I'll show you that integration, some light integration, but you can customize it for any of them, which is why I use Gradle with Visual Studio Code. And it's not that hard. You can do the same kind of thing with some of the Git stuff. Last but not least, they've added extensions. I think I spelled extensions wrong. Looks wrong to me anyway. But extensions. So you can actually have any kind of extension. Now this is where it gets kind of interesting. We'll see an extension application in a bit. But so people that have used Atom, does it feel really slow for you? Because that's my problem with Atom that I have. Because I end up going like, okay, I need extension XYZ because I want to do whatever language development, so I want some integration, and all of a sudden it's really slow. And I don't know why, and I'm trying to figure that part out, because if I'm going to do something slow, I might lose Visual Studio. So, I mean, Atom is cross-platform. I'm like, I don't know. Or Eclipse, I guess, would be the alternative, and that's also really slow and big. So, but yeah, it provides all of these different things. And it's, like I said, it's focused around being a rich text editor or code editor. This isn't trying to be its big, giant IDE big thing that Visual Studio is or Eclipse, but it is kind of giving you a lightweight IDE, but focusing on your editing experience and giving you the core tool that you need to kind of be productive. So the real question comes down, and I actually asked this question to a couple people early on, why does this even exist? And at the end of the day, like I've kind of been hinting at, it's a lightweight, it's very lightweight. It's a small text editor. What's your text editor of choice? When you're going to edit a code file, what do you use?
VI.
VI.
Sublime.
Sublime, there we go. Anyone else that is Atom? Like Visual Studio? Okay. Sorry. But how much RAM is on your machine?
A bunch.
Is it more than 16?
16.
Okay, well good, you got enough then. Mine only has 6, so it kind of chugs
Well,
along.
I do it in Azure VM, so that's like 4 or 7.
That's 4 or 7, okay, fair enough. But it is much more lightweight compared to even Eclipse or any of those kind of big IDEs. Notepad++ is another common one that I hear. The idea is, again, it takes the same style of that. It's trying to give you the simple, most basic pieces you need to edit code and focus in on code. And then kind of add a couple of things as decoration and icing to make it a little bit sweeter, a little bit more productive. Except for the VI guy in the back, you know, he's hardcore. So give him a terminal and a black screen and he's good to go. Like I said, it provides a solid IDE foundation that can be extended. And that's the big piece, is the extension component, where it's limited in what you can extend, but it's what you need to be able to extend without giving, what I found with Atom is that you can extend almost anything. You can just start changing the UI, you can start adding menus, you can start doing whatever you feel like. They give you a nice little sandbox to play in, and they give you, it's a powerful sandbox that you can integrate with, but it's limited, and that's on purpose. Because again, I've installed some extensions since then. I don't have lag, I don't have problems. And again, it's limited, but for what you can do with it, but again, it works for what you need. And we'll see that in a bit. But this is the big one, this is the real reason. It decouples Microsoft's development story from Microsoft and what we know for the last 10, 15 years. Things like, I'm a Microsoft developer, so what does that mean? That means I work in .NET. That means I work on Windows only. That means when I start a new project, what does that mean? It means I go file new project. No one does that. That's a Windows thing. That's not a very common practice outside of that world. Project files, CS proj, VB proj, all those things, it decouples you from that. This proprietary component that Microsoft's had. It's supported. It's just not required. They're not just throwing everything out going like, we're starting fresh. But a lot of the stuff with the new ASP.NET 5, has anyone been following that scene? .NET, I guess it's DNX, or .NET Core, I think is what it's called. Is that what it's called? Yeah, so .NET Core. Is anyone following that? Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about with .NET 5 and the new stuff. So for those that don't know, The new version of .NET, so ASP.NET 5 and .NET 5, is cross-platform, so it works on Linux, Mac, and on Windows as well. So it's a subset. .NET Core is a very small subset of what we originally knew as .NET, and it's dramatically changing stuff to a point where a lot of people are very upset with it because, again, you've been doing something for 10 or 15 years in one way. .NET's been around for a while. Now they're gonna, they're moving the cheese, and it's gonna be really weird for everyone because there's no direct upgrade path as of yet. It's not officially released yet, but release candidate 1 is out, and there's a lot of major changes. But they're trying to go down the line of something a little bit more standard, something a little bit more cross-platform, and not coupling you to this, here's how Microsoft does business. It's how does everyone code, and here's why our tools are great, here's why our things are great. And you can integrate what you already know and love into what we have. So that's the idea, and this is the IDE story for that. Because Visual Studio might one day get there. There's no doubt about it. They're going to keep doing Visual Studio. It's great. It does a lot of cool stuff. But for the stuff like Node.js, they're putting a lot of emphasis on Node and JavaScript. And if you've seen Windows 10, a lot of those apps and a lot of those things run purely on JavaScript. It's just how their new world works. Visual Studio Team Services, the new build engine underneath the hood, is not using MS Build. It's using a new one that was written with Node. So that's really weird. Like that's something that if you go back 5 years and say, guess what Microsoft's going to do? They're going to ditch MS Build, and they're going to throw in this Node.js built from the ground up. And you're going to be like, that guy's stupid, do not hire him. That's what you're going to say to that guy because he clearly doesn't know Microsoft development.
Yeah, they ditched MS Build in 2010.
Yeah, well,
No, been gone for 5 years.
Been gone for 5 years? What did they replace it with?
Windows Workflow.
Well, there we go. I guess they, so one step, I guess that was 2 steps backward, and now they're kind of digging their way into now they're in Node.js land. I'm happy because I'm biased though. But again, it decouples them from this idea, and it's a slow process, and Visual Studio will always be supported, but things like the new .NET Core, Visual Studio supports that as well, but they wanted something for the Mac user. What's the Mac user going to do to get onto .NET Core? They wanted to give them a bit of a simpler experience. So what do? Well, you can just throw them into Xcode, which I've never met a Mac user that's like, you know what, I need Xcode. Like they prefer not to. That's my experience. I'm not going to judge you if you're an Xcode person. Linux, what are you going to do with Linux? Have them boot up Clips quickly and just be like, hey, now we've installed about 14 plugins. And wait, what version of Java are you running? 1.8.64? Oh, well, that's all wrong now, and it gets weird. So let's just have a simple IDE that's focused on code, because that's all they care about is coding with the tools, and the rest of it will come. And that's what the answers.
How does that compare to Sublime? Isn't that what Sublime does too?
Yep, except this one's Microsoft, and it's focused in on Microsoft tools. So there is a spin on that, right? It's a Microsoft kind of spun tool, and they try to direct you towards their newer stuff, which is focused on DNX and focused in on Node and JavaScript, as well as a couple other things like the new Office plugin model and stuff like that. So I'll get to that though. So that being said, I'm sure you guys love hearing me talk. Let's see some demos. All right. So this is a command line. Oh, I broke it already. Look at me go. Okay, awesome. So let's go to my demo directory. I'm going to actually slide this forward a little bit and adjust the camera. There we go. Okay, so for those of you, I'm just going to command myself back into my demo directory if I can type. Okay, and I'll make all these demos and stuff like that available afterwards. Same with my slide deck, but I'll be posting the video and everything on the .NET user group thing and on my blog eventually. So stay tuned for that kind of stuff. So first thing I'm going to do is you're probably wondering why the hell I'm in a bloody command line. And that's because as soon as you install code, you get this crazy thing. You can actually open it up from the command line, which is actually quite nice. So I'm just going to open it up. Let's start with the warm-up. And we'll do not do C#. I'll tell you why after we do this. So what I've done is I got a basic application. Can I zoom this in easily? Here. I was going to zoom in a little bit here. 1 second, sorry. There we go. So if I go down the side here, you can see all it's done here is I've opened up a folder. That's my new project. So if you're into Sublime, if you're already familiar with that, this is not strange to you. In fact, if you talk to, I would say, the average non-Microsoft developer, this isn't crazy. The idea that, hey, you start a new project, well, you open up a new folder that's empty, and you start adding stuff to that folder, and then things start to work, and you build, and you get all that stuff working. That's the exact same model they're taking. Like, they're not reinventing the wheel. They're not going like, hey guys, Visual Studio was a good run, but now we've got the smarter way of doing 4-dimensional development or some crazy Microsoft branding thing. This is just, we found what other people are doing and we put it all into a box so that we can give it to other people. That's where it goes. So I've set up a basic Node.js application. So I'm not going to educate you guys on all the details of Node.js. That's not what we're here for. But it's an Express.js application. So it's just a web server that executes a bunch of, that's your server side, and it delivers web pages, and essentially an ASP.NET MVC application. Same style of thing, except way simpler. And why can't I see my cursor? That's kind of interesting. Anyway. So let's start seeing some stuff over here. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the basics. Here, one sec. I'm going to zoom it, because I can't see my cursor, and that's kind of awkward. Show tree icon, draw. Apparently that is how it's going to go. So we're doing this cursorless, everybody. It's going to be fun. So it will be. I'm pretty good with it. So you got the 4 tabs on the left-hand side. You got Explore, which is what we're in now, which just gives you a whole option of like, here's what files are open. So if I double click something, go up to the top here, you can see I got a working file. So I have a little working file section, and I got my whole project folder open on the bottom. Pretty straightforward. Go to the left here. I have a search, so you want to do some searching. You have a whole setup for that, so you can search through all your files, all the data. This is the Git integration. So you can see I don't have this integrated with Git yet, because I haven't initialized the repository. So I click on that button, kicks it open, and it gives me a nice little setup here. You can see I got 31 files. It's pretty good. And the last one is the debug. So this we'll get into in a little bit. But this is kind of the stuff that, see, and I am a former Visual Studio developer, and this is something that I don't think I've ever seen in another IDE, is that lovely little play button at the top. I really like the play button. That F5, every time I've written a build script, I always have a task called F5. Because I like that, just the idea of like, I push F5 and it just runs. And that's the idea always. Build it, run it, that's what I want. And this can be the same thing. This one is just run. So if I go up to the top, okay, we're gonna zoom out a little bit. Sorry that's small, but I'll zoom in on the important parts. So you can see here, on the right-hand side, the debug console opened up, and now what it's doing is it's actually, that's not anything magical, that's just what you would see from the terminal. It's just running a command line back in the back end and actually funneling commands to that, and then taking that output and pushing it up to the debug console. It's very, very straightforward. So if I go to localhost 3000, I know, it's amazing, right? I made a web page happen. Like, I know, I am the best developer you've ever seen. But let's just see some of the other stuff you can do. So, like I said, you can do some stuff like breakpoints. It got debugger integration. So you can see I have all my controls up here. And if I have, let's do a route. Let's go to users. Okay, so maybe not users. Let's do quick start. Gonna put a breakpoint again, just put a red dot over on the left-hand side. And now I go over here, quick start. If you see in the bottom, my little cursors kind of, or my icons glowed up, and now I have my res.render. Now if I highlight it, I get my kind of little watch menu, but we're only in the file area. Let's go to the debug menu. And I'll actually zoom in on this one. So, you can see here I'm getting all of my regular kind of stuff that I see. Again, if you're familiar with Visual Studio or a big IDE, you get this kind of stuff, right? Local variables, all that kind of stuff. And in JavaScript, this is actually really useful, because I find it really useful. So you get your request object, you can browse it. You can add an expression for watch. So let's just do console.log and says, hello, Dylan. And it's undefined. But I can also double click, right click it, and then I get debug to run to cursor, add to watch, so I do that. router's not available because I'm actually in this. So let's actually take that one, show you something that worked. So there you go. And it'll stay there, right?
Is there a call stack?
There is a call stack. That's where I was going. Right there.
Yeah.
Bam. So it's the Node.js. That's the whole point. That's why I'm doing the demo. But you do get all your call stack, and this is again Node.js. So this is woven into the Node.js debugger. So it's not that crazy. This is if you use has anyone here debugged Node.js before? One. So traditionally speaking, I guess the Node debugger is usually done with Chromium, like Chrome dev tools, and you kind of attach the debugger to that, and you can do some stuff. This is doing the same sort of thing underneath the hood. It's just finding the debugger instance and attaching to it, and then weaving it into the code. It also has support for things like code maps, or source maps, sorry. So if you generate source maps with your JavaScript, so if you use something like TypeScript or CoffeeScript or Babel, if you're one of the people that are using the newer versions of JavaScript and the newer spec, that transpiles that code down into really optimized, great JavaScript. So rather than looking at this garbled mess of optimized JavaScript, you can set a breakpoint in your regular code and it'll just map it back and it just knows what to do with it. So yeah, that's kind of the summary of that. If I get out of this. And you can click restart, you can step through with your controls. I can step over this, push play again, go back to my browser. Yeah, question?
So is the debugger does it only work with Node.js right now?
No and yes, kind of. So this is going to lead, thank you for the segue. So the question was, does the debugger only work with Node.js? And my answer was absurdly vague, and I said no and yes. Not even maybe, I said no and yes. So to answer that question, I actually have a different project that I'll open up here. So we're going to open up, we're going to go to DW demo VS Code. And then this one that, how many people here program in C#? Hey, there we go. And this is the one language that I'm not using. But I'm going to explain why. So what I did to get this code is, again, I'm using out of the box, nothing fancy in terms of the demos. And that's on purpose because the focus is on the IDE or the editor itself. So this supports CS project files. It's got this whole thing about using C#. If you go to the documentation, go to code.visualstudio.com and check out the docs. There's a whole section on the magic that is C# support. And it's great. But there's a catch. The catch is that by C# they actually mean C#, the newest version with respect to .NET Core. That is not out yet. And as of about 2 weeks ago, they just changed a whole bunch of stuff again and renamed a bunch of things. So things that used to be called DNX, it's now called just .NET from the command line. Just all this stuff. So I built this thing in Visual Studio. I found a new project, created a solution, created a nice little console app for you guys to all gawk at, a little console beep and all this nice stuff. I can't run it from here. And that's because when I go to my debug window, so I'll actually see if I can get this right. If I click on launch, I get a launch and I get an attach. And if I click on launch, it'll actually just blow up, I think. Let's try pushing play. So here, I'll zoom in on that. Cannot create debug session for adapter mono. How many people here know what mono is? Yeah, so that's how they make .NET cross-platform, is they've kind of taken mono away from the mono people and kind of said, we're going to tell you how this is going to go. And which is, I mean, some people think it's bad. I personally think it's okay because I wasn't invested in mono beforehand, so it's cheap. I'm sitting from the cheap seats enjoying it. But it's integrated with mono. So if I actually go to the file that contains this task, we'll get into this a little bit better. Go to launch.json. You can see here, this is what it actually is. This is a task file. This is how this kind of works. It's saying launch mono. It's expecting you to have mono installed. A couple of things like this. And if you don't have that installed, well, doesn't really work all that well. So even if I go to stuff like, so let's go to my C# file here, program.cs. Normally you get a lot of the cool stuff that comes with Visual Studio, things like code lens, that's actually built in, so you can actually see how many references a certain method gets, all that kind of stuff, proper IntelliSense, all this kind of stuff. I have cheap IntelliSense on, which is not, it's just actually going through my file and saying what other words I've already typed. And yeah, maybe you want to write args or possibly beep or class. I don't know. Every word is great in my agnostic value set that I've promoted here. I can even say things like, see, clearly hello is a very important thing that should be in IntelliSense. But that's the kind of the problem, right? Like, it should support C#, and it did up until they did this big release from what I understand. And because I'm more of a Node guy, I never bother. I'm like, whatever. I'm sure it'll be fine up until I do this presentation. And then 2 weeks ago happened, and now it doesn't work pretty much. So the answer to your question, out of the box, it's supposed to support C# out of the box and Node.js, but it can be supported for any language. And I'm going to show you how to do this with Java, so I can make it work with Java as well. You don't get all of the fancy features, like they'll always have a bit of an edge for the ones that Microsoft endorses, so JavaScript, TypeScript, C#, and Node. But you will get other native support in terms of like IntelliSense, or sorry, not IntelliSense, but debugging and real-time, like the squiggly lines and stuff like that. You'll get some extra support for any language you want. And I know a number of groups have already created them for languages like Go. F# is woven into that as well. They have F# is actually natively supported, I think. They don't talk about it on the website, but they do. They do support it because it's a .NET language. I think someone made one for Haskell, like, because clearly Haskell's making a comeback. So I don't know. Maybe Haskell is making a comeback. I'm just not sure. So there's a bunch of languages that kind of weaves into anything. So it's extensible.
So Dave, I'm trying to figure out in my head. So obviously Visual Studio proper has a whole whack of features that Seam doesn't. It sounds like they could be added in here, and probably maybe will be added in here. So like, where's the vision for this? Is this at some point going to be just a new Visual Studio written in Node with all the stuff Visual Studio has? Or is it going to be fundamentally different somehow? Is the direction different? So
that's a great question. The question was, is this, if I'm going to kind of paraphrase you, Dylan, where is Visual Studio Code going when you compare this to something like Visual Studio, where Visual Studio has a lot of power and it's a very powerful IDE versus this is a very lightweight thing, but it looks like over time they could add all those features to it. So is this going to be the replacement for Visual Studio? To answer that question, honestly, I think, yeah, that's really what I think this is leading to in a long time. The thing that Visual Studio proper versus code, Visual Studio proper, like Enterprise or any of your standard SKUs, gives you everything you need out of the box. Like, here's your box, here's the 57 things that it does, and it does them great. Stuff like the lab, I know that if you're using things like TFS or any of those other Microsoft products, like this stuff is woven into Visual Studio proper. And
that's just like Team Explorer. It used to be an extension. It's built into the box now, but it could easily be an extension.
It could be. The thing, as it stands now, you couldn't really integrate that properly unless it was a command line app and you wanted to make sure that all your stuff worked in a terminal, right? In terms of customizing the UI, very limiting in what you can do with Visual Studio Code. This thing's purpose is to really be a great code editor and not anything else. Everything else is supposed to be icing. So when you have things like Team Explorer, or the big one that I use is the Cloud Explorer for the Azure websites and databases and stuff. I like using that in Visual Studio. That kind of thing can't be built very easily with this because there's no way to just start adding new windows, which is something that I think you can do in add-on. You could just inject a whole page in there and start adding custom UI elements. This is not possible in Visual Studio Code.
Can't do UI stuff.
They do some minimal UI stuff, but nothing that dramatic. So, but it's still in beta, and where are they going with it? I think eventually they will go down that road when they can figure out how to keep it in a proper sandbox. Because if you look at the Atom story, right, people have taken extensions and they wrote just extensions that are clearly just running multiple do while loops, while true, do nothing, and just eat up RAM or something. I don't know what it's doing, but it's doing something really messed up and it just slows my whole system down. So I think when Microsoft gets that little box sorted out, I think you'll see some extensions that are like, hey, now you can add, because this thing can support, all this is just HTML pages. That's all this is. That's a really, like, this is an Electron app, that is just a big text box with CSS.
So things like, in the debug tab, there's like 4 sections in there.
Yep.
So if I'm writing a debugger extension for some new language I want this to support, I'm very much constrained. I get these 4 tabs and that's it. If I want to introduce a 5th type of data thing, can't do it.
As far as I know, not yet, no.
Okay.
it's very much like, here's the standard pieces of a debugger. It's got a error output you want to map to the source code. You got your call stack. You got these pieces, and you just kind of weave those things in. So, does that answer your question a bit?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions while we're taking a moment to answer some questions? You're asking great questions, and now I'm gonna be uncomfortable at the end. You've already done all the good questions for my Q&A at the end. So, but are there any other questions right now? Or do you want me to keep going? Good. Cool. So that's the story about C#. But like I say, it's got native Node.js stuff in here. And we'll see some more demos of this. So I got a whole bunch of extra demos for this stuff too. So we'll close this one because this is garbage. Don't save. And we'll go back to the slides to see what we're actually doing. Okay. Oh man, I should have done from my slide. My bad. All right. There we go. It's okay, everyone. I'm a professional. Okay, there we go. Yeah, we learned all these things. A lot of slides. Jeez, who wrote this deck? Seriously. Okay. WTF are tasks. So a task runner, right? Like the idea is I want to automate things so that I don't have to. So when I learn how to do something like a compile, now this is something that took me a while to grasp personally as a junior developer. I didn't understand what a CS project file actually was. Now, we got some professionals in the room from what I can gather from all you guys raising your hands with Visual Studio and your C# knowledge. A CS project is essentially a build file. Is that about right?
It's an MS build file.
It's an MS build file, right? So it tells Visual Studio and the build components how to build your solution, or your project, I guess. It's a CS proj, right? How to build it, so how to call the compiler, how to execute, here's how you execute tests, here's how you do all this stuff. Now that's a lot of stuff underneath the hood for a file new project. And that was the problem I had, because I didn't understand that stuff. I didn't know that all that stuff was happening. So when someone said, actually Amir was the one that asked me the question years ago, I was learning how to do some JavaScript and some CoffeeScript stuff. And he goes like, so where's your, how do you do a compile? And I said, oh yeah, well I go and I do coffee from the terminal. I'm like, yeah, I'm a pro, I'm using the terminal. He's like, okay, so you have to write, how do you do that and test? Like, well, I have to write it in the command line. It was like, well, how does that work with anything else? Like, how do you repeat that? And I was like, I don't know. How do you repeat that? And it's like, well, you do a build file. I'm like, what's that? And yeah, that's my knowledge, because again, Visual Studio abstracts a lot of that away, and Visual Studio Code does not. It goes, here's your empty folder. If you don't know, we don't either, but hey, have a good day. So tasks are, if you think of it as what you have to do in a regular, so F5, my magic task that does all this stuff in Visual Studio. So what does that do? Well, first it compiles all your code. Maybe it executes a series of tests on that compiled code. Maybe it kicks off a web server if you're doing a web app, so it spins up IIS, Express, or whatever flavor of .NET-based server that you want for web stuff. And yeah, those are all different tasks, right? And then it runs it and loads up, actually it'll load up Internet Explorer or whatever browser you chose, and that's another task. So that's what a task is on a general sense. So all that stuff is done in your CS, in your solution file or your CS proj file or whatever. It's like something is telling it to do all this stuff. And instead, Visual Studio Code says, hey, great, if you have tasks, we love you, that's great. But you gotta write them yourself, and you gotta tell us what tasks those are. So that's what task is. So out of the box, it does have support for gulp, grunt, and jake, which is the JavaScript version of make, or whatever the original, I guess make was the original one, I think. Yeah, that's the C one, there we go. I use gulp quite a bit in grunt, but it works with 100% adaptable to your favorite task runner. And I use Gradle and Maven at work all the time, because actually to be fair, I'm the only one that actually uses build files at my work because I'm annoying and I like to do things so I don't have to do them a second time, but that's a different story. At the end of the day, it'll work with any task runner. It just cares that you can tell it how to execute the task. This kind of goes to Adam's question, or his point, to if you had a task that was, hey, do a git diff, this is how you would do it. You just say, here's how you execute that. So if you can do a git diff task, it'll just work. So I'll show you the built-in ones, then I'm going to show you a custom one from the ground up so you can kind of compare how to do it yourself. And it isn't that tricky. It's just a little bit of thought and a little bit of regular expressions. If you're unfamiliar with those, okay, they even acknowledge that people don't like regexes in general because they're so weird to look at, but they give you some nice resources on the code site, and Microsoft kind of gives you that developer like, hey, here you go, here's some tools. So let's see some demos. So like I said, out of the box, we actually have support for, I'll just open up a new instance of code. We actually have support for Grunt, Gulp, and Jake. So lately I've been using Gulp. So I'm gonna open up that one. So pretty straightforward. This is a really simple kind of application. This is actually a TypeScript component, or a TypeScript project. What's that?
PowerPoint.
Oh, whoops. Haha. Thank you. Minimized for me. Let's try this again. Let the thing catch up. Minimize. How's that look? Better? You can see things? I'll zoom in on the important parts. So if I actually just go over to my project, in the root of my project folder, I have a gulp file.js. So that's the kind of the standard way of defining a task file for gulp. And over here, I write a bunch of JavaScript code, and I have a whole series of different things. I have my default task that executes all of these other tasks, so assets, libs, ts, which is, like assets is copying all of my game assets. This is actually a phasered game application. Libs, so taking all my client-side libraries that I want on the client and actually pulling them and moving them into the appropriate directories. TS, which is my TypeScript compilation. Sass, which is my style sheet compilation. Minify HTML, which will minify HTML. And last but not least, I turn on a watch, so I can actually watch the files change, and actually as I make edits, it'll just reload the website. If I go down, you can see it's just all, I'm not going to go through the details, but it's all JavaScript code. I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff. But now this is where it gets kind of neat. So if I go to the top here, and I'm going to do Control-Shift-P. This is the command palette. So if you have used Sublime, this should look pretty familiar. Again, not reinventing the wheel. Microsoft has figured it out. We're done reinventing the wheel. Let's just go take the good ideas and just put them into a really nice box and put Microsoft on it. It's a really great idea. So this is all the series of different commands and things you can do from here. So if I type task, I'll zoom in on this. I have configured task runner, run build task, run test task, show task log, terminate running task. Like, it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to do run task. Now, which task, you ask? You can see that little loading bar go up. It's just going to think for a minute. But what it's going to do is, because it supports it natively, it actually knows, hey, there's a gulp file in this root directory, and it's going to show me all of my tasks. And there you go. So I can actually execute whatever task I've done. I haven't done any coding for that. I haven't configured anything. This is just me doing palette, opening up the command palette, saying write task, and then it figures the rest out. Why are they doing that? Well, has anyone done a new Visual Studio web project recently? In Visual Studio 2015? Where they got rid of the whole gulp grunt integration component? Because when I upgraded our 2013 website, or from Visual Studio 2013 to 2015, I learned that apparently none of our styling sheets were being compiled anymore in the build. So you have to do that all yourself now. So this is where I was like, great. So they pulled features out, which is cool. But this is the same style. So they support gulp, they support grunt, and they support Jake. Those are the kind of the three best flavors for JavaScript. So if I wanted to run, let's just say default, and I go over here to the right, the output window opens up, and you can see that's exactly what the command line actually just writes. It just says, here's everything that's going on. And if I want to zoom out of this, open up a web browser, we'll go to, oh wait, actually, sorry. What I haven't done in this one is set up my F5 where it actually runs it. So this is actually a work in progress for myself. So we'll do tasks, gulp, and then HTTP server. And we want it in the dist folder. See if this works off the cusp if I have it installed properly. There we go. So it's port 8080, minimize that. And there we go. So this is just a little game application that I've made. It's just an HTML canvas that just shows some words and a regular web page. Nothing too crazy. I could have mapped that same command to a task in Visual Studio Code. I'll show you how to do that. So if I go in here, and we're going to end this task, so we go tasks, terminate running task. There we go. See, you can see on the right side there, the task default was terminated by user crest. Now I'm going to do this. We're going to go Control-Shift-P, again, tasks, and then configure task runner. So what this does, it opens up this nice little, on the left, you can see it added a file. If I'll zoom in on that. Tasks.json. This is how everything kind of works now. All their config files, everything is just a JSON file. They're even doing this in the new Visual Studio or the new ASP.NET. You no longer have CS project files, you have project.json. I think they're keeping that, I'm not sure. But this is kind of how it works. You just fill out your tasks.json and you start working with it. So if I zoom out, and let's see here, see if I get to keep my, there we go, I can keep my command line. So this is actually kind of neat because what it's doing, it goes command is gulp, is shell command true, and then I can set my arguments. Then in tasks, I can open this array up, control, oops, let's open up a new object, and then I do this. So it's smart enough to know that this is a task.json file, so I get my lovely IntelliSense. So I can start saying, okay, well, what the command is. So let's say task name is called, let's call it, it would be, let's say we did a git diff kind of thing. If I had a grunt or a gulp task for doing a git diff, this would work. And you start kind of programming all the different pieces to it, or adding the different configurations. So is it a build command? All that does is it maps this to the default Visual Studio build command, so Control-Shift-B or Control-Shift-T if it's a test command. You can have one for the other one. Problem matchers I'll get to in a sec. But you can kind of see, like, it's pretty, this isn't overly complicated. It's just kind of saying, what do you want to run? And it'll actually just run gulp, your arguments, the task name, those arguments, and then funnel that output into that output window that we saw earlier. You can also funnel and integrate that deeply into the actual code editor if you're doing something like linting. So if you want to get the little squiggly lines like you normally do in Visual Studio, you can actually get that, and that's what I'm going to show you next. So I'm going to zoom out of this.
Does it have a REPL built in?
Oh, which one? Sorry?
A REPL? Like, so you,
A REPL?
You don't know what that is, eh?
Nope. Is that a made-up word, Dylan? Because if it's a made-up word, I don't know what that is.
So C# only recently got the read eval print loops. So you can, like PowerShell, when you're in a PowerShell editor, you get the script and you got the console down here. Yep. Then you like type PowerShell and it evaluates it.
Oh, the evaluation window. So it doesn't have that built in. And that's actually a good question because I do like having that. But the thing is, being a JavaScript developer, I never think of that because all I'm doing is I'm opening up the console in a browser window and just there's a terminal in there, right, or an immediate window essentially. But yeah, so no, there isn't one of those yet. That's actually a really good one. Do you have something to say? Or?
I was just saying that is what REPL is.
That's what REPL is. Okay, so it is a word.
Yeah.
All right, so Dylan knows things. Look at this.
The F# interactive is
Same idea. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's close this one.
It's a very trendy idea, dude. You should know this.
I should. I'm not nearly as trendy as I once was. All this Java programming has slowed me down. Okay, open folder. Now we're going to go to the weird one, Gradle. How many people here are high-end Gradle developers? Amir secretly is. He just loves Java down in the deepest part of his heart, just like he loves VB. So I've already completed this file. I'm actually, because of time, I'm actually just going to uncomment it rather than, I realize you guys want me to code live in front of you. But I'm going to walk you through the basics of a Gradle build. So if I go to build.gradle, this is my awesome build file. This is what the average Gradle file looks like. I'm setting my main class against the Java applications. This is what I'm building. I got repositories that I'm not using. I have no dependencies, and I created a custom task called getSword. It's a Zelda reference because I'm a Zelda nerd. And the idea is just to print a line when that happens. So it's not going to auto-detect this because Microsoft, as awesome and as big as they can be, they're not going to go find all the task managers out there and just write native integration for them and then own all that source code and hold it. What they're going to do is they're going to give you the ability to integrate this yourself, and we started to see that with Gulp. So if if I go back, what am I, there we go. Go to my tasks.json. So I've created actually 2 different tasks. Gradle, that plugin, actually does a run for me. So I wanted to run my Java application so I can lint it. This is where that kind of comes in. So if I actually do Control-Shift-B, let it think for a minute. I installed Java just before I came here on this laptop. So I got some coding errors because I'm a sloppy programmer, and for some reason these things are not working, and I don't know why. I have the semicolon, and I've just decided to write random garbage text into my code file before I commit. So the task I executed was compile Java. So if I zoom out, we're just going to kind of look at how I'm doing this. If I actually go into the code editor, let's open up source, hello link. You can see this here. So it's figured this out already. So if I'm actually a smart coder and I'm actually got this all integrated, it's actually going to give me the information I need. So I fix this, right? Oh, I don't want to draw, but I can fix this by just probably deleting it. If I do something like int something 1 semicolon save, and I can build. It's thinking. You can see what it's executing, and then it actually executed my application. Listen, this is a Java app built with Visual Studio Code, built successful. That's the output. Yes?
So if you say int something equals 1D, for example, does it lint?
If I change that code to like 1D, and then I save the file, it doesn't actually build it in it natively, but if I try to build it, so now that being said, I don't have a watch set up on my thing. So there was a task in here. If I'll go over here.
So you don't get the little squigglies until you explicitly build.
That's because it's on. I did that on purpose because I haven't set up a watching task. So if I zoom in on that, if I say is watching is true, so let's actually just try this. You know what's fun with demos? You just change stuff on the fly. So let's see. I don't think this will work, but I'm going to say is watching. So I'm going to see if it actually runs it constantly. But I'm pretty sure you have to configure it. So if I do 1, save it, that works. Okay, we'll go back 1D. Save the file. Yeah, it's not actually doing anything. So if you did set up a proper watch, like in Gulp, for example, I actually had a watch command. So just sitting there watching those files.
So as it changes, it just really...
Yeah, that's the idea for that specific command. Because it knows people are going to want that kind of that integration, right? As you're coding, you don't want to write like 30 minutes of code, realize you didn't save it, click save, and then it's like big red squiggly red line, right? That's what my code looks like. It's always a big mess. So you can do that, but I've actually never woven that in to Java at least. But I did do that with Gulp, and you can just say is watching, and it'll just sit there and know that it's going to run this.
And the way that works, it's fast enough?
It seems fast enough. So if I do save and then build.
No, with the watch I'm talking about.
I would assume so. I haven't really gotten it working other than like with the JavaScript. Like the JavaScript stuff, it goes really quickly. But I'm usually watching it while I'm debugging, right? So I'm doing a watch while I'm debugging. I'm never actually doing it while I'm coding.
Yeah, I'm thinking like C#, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I had to build every time I changed a line of code to get the squigglies, like I don't think that's what it's doing in the background in regular Visual Studio, right? It seems like that would be really slow.
How does it lint otherwise?
I think it does it incrementally, right? Like it keeps the abstract syntax tree that the compiler generates in memory and updates it.
So, but it's probably using a tool that probably has a command line interface. So I mean, let's say you would just have because there's like for JavaScript, there's a series of JavaScript linters, right? JS lint, and rather than actually transpiling my TypeScript into JavaScript all the time, I can just run the lint command and have that be the watch. Like, yeah, have my lint command be the watch and just keep going in the background. And I'm assuming whatever tool you've picked for that is going to be a bit lighter weight. If it's sitting there just doing a full build, so like let's say you have a big enterprise app with multiple things going on, yeah, it'll take 10 minutes to run a build. Well, that's going to suck for your linter, all right? Just to get the squiggly line saying, oh, you forgot a semicolon every 10 minutes. So yeah, if you're running a linter or the proper tool for it and you integrate it like that, shouldn't be a problem. The way you get that integration is what they call a problem matcher. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go over those. And this is where that regex stuff comes in. If I zoom in on that. My regular expression is actually what this is. Now, I'm not going to go into exactly what that does. I wrote that myself about a month and a half ago, and I said I never ever want to do this again until I have to. What it's doing is actually, this is how I parse the output from the terminal. So let's go to the example that Adam had with the git diff. Let's say there was some sort of errors that could come out of that. You can write a regex that'll parse those output errors because they're going to be pretty standard. And you're going to map them to specific properties that they provide. This is where the extension model and the extensibility of Visual Studio Code, you see that sandbox is really limited. You get to pick out a file, which is the match number 1 out of that regex. Number 2 is the location of that file, so that when I get an error, I can be automatically linked to that file. Severity, which is, is it a warning, is it an error? You get that kind of thing. The message that it actually displays. And then this loop is true, is if you have a command line app that has multiple lines of output per error, let's say, you can tell it to parse each line, so your regex can cover multiple lines rather than a single line of output.
What is that being applied to again? That regex is being applied to what?
That regex is being applied to the output of my Gradle command. So if I do, hold on.
So you're gonna write these, everybody's gonna write these regexes for all the
For custom ones, yes.
for custom ones.
For custom ones. Out of the box, you get MS Build, TypeScript, Gulp. You got they have a whole bunch of these problem matchers out of the box.
Ooh.
And a lot of the community is actually like Go, for example. The Go team, the Google team that actually is in charge of Go, they use Visual Studio Code in-house. And they're like, okay, great. So they wrote a series of problem matchers and just released them. And they're just flat text, right? It's just, here's an object, and our JSON object, and that's it. So they're trying to extend those, and you can just release them into the wild. There's a lot of people that are writing these things. So you don't have to write them for yourself every single time. I wrote one just to see how painful it was. And I got this thing done in about, 2 hours because I suck with regexes. And that's really where I stumbled, but it is possible.
Super understandable just by looking at it, right?
Well, clearly, right? Like start line, end line, and I got question marks. That's all that matters. I got .java. Clearly, it's important. So let's zoom out of this. But yeah, so this is what it's actually parsing. It's actually parsing any errors I get. And then if I do stuff like, if I go back to my files, go back to that 1 second, I'll show you that. Let's just make an error again. Control-Shift-Build. And it should blow up in a second. There we go. So I have this error, but if I actually go down here, if you look at the bottom corner, I have this little error thing. It shows me that I actually have an error in my code. If I click on that, you can actually bring this up with the terminal as well, or the command palette as well. I zoom in. Expected, semicolon, it's integrated in there. And if I actually clicked on this, zoom 4, hold on. Let's open up a different file, just so I can actually test this out. Click on it, jumps it over. And that's where that location property, that's where the match is. I'm pulling that information out of the output from the command line, or the output from the terminal, and saying, hey, it's absolute, go over here. You can also set it for relative. There's a whole bunch of different configuration, like tweaks and changes you can make. But that's kind of the customization aspect of it. Any questions about problem matchers or anything? Yeah?
So you're pulling out the file that had an error and the absolute path and opening it in here, but because it already exists in the folder, it just flies to it.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, when I actually run, so what it's doing, so if I actually show you this, I'm actually parsing this specific line. Like that's what it's going through. It's looping through this and going, okay, get the location. That's why I have that. That's the first match where I have that .java. Well, that's the whole file name. It's saying grab that file, the absolute path, and then now I know where that file lives. So that when I click on that error, it's going to jump me to that. It knows exactly where it lives. Shows me the message, different things like that. It just shows you a bunch of different stuff, so you can kind of pull all that stuff out. That's kind of the idea, at least. So the assumption, again, is that whatever compiler you're using or command line tool you're using, it provides you the components that you need to map to that. There's a couple of extra ones that I haven't actually used in Java because it didn't actually provide them, but there is some tweaking you can do. But it needs stuff like it needs to know what the error is, and it needs to know what the message is. You can't just kind of have a problem matcher that does nothing. It has to have some specific components, and it's all documented really well. Yeah.
So do you know if the link uses the output from the from the compiler, or the link has its own?
Oh, it uses the output from the compiler.
So which means a link will always compile code.
Yep.
And tell you.
Yep. that's what the problem matcher is doing. It's rather than the compiler, think of it as whatever task or whatever command you've used. So if it wasn't a compiler and it was just a linter, and you had a different, and you could regex whatever the output was of that linter or anything, the Git component that you wrote, or it doesn't matter. It just takes the output, it doesn't care, and you tell it how to parse it, and it maps those matches you get from your regex to the appropriate pieces that are integrated into code.
So in this case, you're not using a lint, you're just parsing the
Yes,
output.
I'm parsing the output of the compiler, but if I did a linter or if I did anything else, you can parse it accordingly, and it'll just kind of do it that way. All right. Let's get out of this. Okay. Now let's do this properly. Slideshow, current slide. So we got one more cool thing to cover. I was hoping this would come out because this thing, I always like this. So we did that. We talked about problem matches already. So yeah, this is the one that includes MS compile for C# and VB, and I think it does F# as well. TypeScript, JS hint, and ES hint. So if you're a JavaScripter, the linters for that. Less compile is also built in. I think there is one for Sass if you're a CSS person. As you can see, it's kind of web-ish and Node.js focused right now, but there are a bunch of extensions that are out there that are starting to extend this a little bit further. But I think you'll see a lot more you'll see better support as they kind of finalize the mono thing and the .NET Core stuff with .NET 5. And so when you see that stuff kind of come out, I think you'll see Visual Studio Code will be hey, it just worked from day one, what do you know? It's going to be that kind of thing. Because right now it was a little bit flaky and I couldn't actually get the DNX stuff to work. So given I'm not a .NET developer not much anymore, so okay. So we saw the custom problem matcher. So extensions, WTF are extensions. So allows for true tailoring of Visual Studio Code. They're community driven, which is important. And it's available through the Visual Studio Marketplace. So, and again, the whole thing of the extensions, when you're writing them, they're actually TypeScript or JavaScript based. This is, like I said, the whole point there when I said at the beginning, it's built on Electron. Electron is Node.js. Node.js is JavaScript and TypeScript. So they provide templates for this, and I'll go over all of that shortly. But you could write it in any sort of language you wanted that transpiles into JavaScript. All it cares about is that it's JavaScript in the end, because it's interpreting that and it's running Chromium underneath the hood, V8 underneath the hood and doing this whole thing. So, yeah, and we'll see the templates in a sec. And I'll show you that at the end. But if you go to the Visual Studio Marketplace, we'll just bring it up now, why not? Marketplace at visualstudio.com, Visual Studio Code, and you can see here a whole bunch of different stuff. So the stuff they've kind of pushed, these are the featured ones. Go, spelling and grammar, which is really important for me because I use this for a blog. I have a static blog and I use Markdown, so this is pretty important. There's a PowerShell integration, GSCS linter. Again, it's another Microsoft one. If I zoom out again, sorry. It's gonna scroll down. So let's see, debuggers, I'll just do this. So debugger for Chrome, there's a Go debugger, all kinds of stuff. There's different languages, a whole bunch of others. People have done like timers and different things like that you can do. Like classic ASP, that one's new. Oh man, what a sad state of affairs. Says the guy doing like old Java code in Oracle Forms development, right? Like that's not good. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of different stuff here. So yeah, if we go scroll down a little bit, there's linters, there's a whole series of them from here. Dart, snippets, themes, so they have a bunch of custom themes, which I didn't cover, but if you really want to make it pretty, you can. VS Code Spotify, because that's really important. Apparently, Visual Studio Team Services, that's brand new. So there's a Team Services integration plugin. All this stuff is there. Now this is where I'll say that the caveat is, and we'll see this in a second as I load up the next demo. Like I said before, it's really limited. So actually, before we do that, before I open up my pre-canned demo, let's close my web browser. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a brand new project from scratch. So I'll zoom in on this one. Y'all see that okay? Yeah, okay. So what you want to do is they've actually set up a series of generators. How many people here are familiar with Yeoman, or how do you pronounce that? Yeoman? Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Everyone's like, so okay, good. So people, I'm not crazy. Those are the people that know what I'm talking about. This package is a Node.js package. It's cross-platform, but it's called Yo. So you install it, the Yeoman package, and then you install a series of generators. And they created a series of generators called code. Now I'm installing this globally. This is the command you use to get this set up, and it'll do all this magic underneath the hood. I've already installed it because it takes time, and I don't want to waste your time with watching a thing install. So what you end up doing is in the command line now, with Node, you do yo code. And this is all open source as well. They've kind of developed this whole thing, and they've added to it, and they've created a series of generators. And this is your templating. So for the different templates that we're used to with File New Project, this is kind of the equivalent of that. Makes it a little bit easier. And there's a whole series, and the whole community has gotten around this. You can find a template for pretty much anything you can think of. And this is what you get. So these are the two new ones that they've added: new extension TypeScript, new extension JavaScript. And if you want to do new color theme, language support, whatever you want to do. Yeah?
So it's possible to create a task in Visual Code or Visual Studio that creates all of these different templates for you.
Yes. So if you wanted to extend this, if you wanted to create your own custom template for a good example, so for me, like when I'm doing TypeScript dev or a single page application, like I have a very specific set of tools that I use and wire them all up. That takes me usually 2 hours from scratch just because I got to remember what I did and what's that little detail. I can just create a template for that, just go, yo, this, and it'll just come down. So, and it's all these templates are all open source as well. They're hosted in GitHub, and then they just kind of combine them all as far as I know, or make the catalog apparent through the Yeoman setup. So for us, we're gonna create a new, I gotta use the arrow keys now. Sure, now I need my mouse. So I'll click enter. We'll just do a TypeScript one, doesn't make a difference. So what's the name of our extension? It's called Hello Winnipeg.net. What is the identifier of my extension? We'll go with the project name. What is the description? The description is David is more awesome than Dylan today. Oh, I can't even see it. You'll have to trust me. Publisher is I've already set up a Winnipeg.net as a default publisher, and by publisher, like I didn't do anything magical. I just typed in Winnipeg.net. Like that's the name that shows up. It's nothing fancy about getting a publisher name as far as I know. Do I want to initialize a Git repository? Of course I do. Source control is my friend. And do I want to overwrite this because I tested this earlier? I guess yes, or I'm not sure why all that other stuff is there. So we'll go yep. And I'm going to zoom out, see if I blew up everything. Yes. Okay. So I'm all done, and now I'm running npm install to install your required dependencies. If this fails, try running the command yourself. So I probably should have deleted the old folder is what's going on here. So now it's doing all the installs. Okay, so let's see if this worked. So let's hello winnipeg.net, and we want to go code dot. We're going to open up a new instance of code. And this is the basic template. You can see here, it's kind of building off of all the things we've already seen. Now I have a launch.json, which is the way that actually it's, again, another config file to launch my application from the debugger. We didn't cover that, but again, it's what we're going to see here. Settings.json is your workspace settings for that specific project. So if you want to have tabs versus spaces, all that kind of stuff, it's all customizable for yourself. Or if you want it, and this is overriding whatever your personal settings are. Or sorry, I think it's one of the way. Your personal settings can override these project settings. But if you want, like let's say you have a whole team working on this, say here's our standard. I want 16 spaces for one indent because I'm crazy, and that's what Dylan uses, at least that's what I know. So I'm just picking on this guy. I don't know. It's been years since you've been to one of these, and I'm just picking on you. You're front row.
It makes sense that people don't indent things 5 times over.
Exactly, it's just done. Just one big space, and you can use your horizontal scroll bar to see. Oh yeah, it is hello world. Good. So yeah, and it uses everything else. So node modules is the standard node piece. Typings is my TypeScript definition files. I'm not going to go over that, but it's absurdly useful if you're into JavaScript or TypeScript because it gives you all the proper IntelliSense that you want for pretty much any JavaScript library that you can think of. It gives me a test directory and a source directory. So if I zoom out of this and I open up test, it kind of gives me a couple of good things here. But here's my extension. This is what TypeScript looks like. We'll click on this. This is what I'm talking about when I say it's limited in terms of what you can do in terms of UI changes. So we're going to change it to hello Winnipeg.net. And I'm going to zoom out. So this isn't anything very complicated, as you could probably guess. Oop, oh, what have I done? There we go. These are the things you can customize. You can customize the messages that appear. You can customize, you can edit content instead of a code editor. So you can replace text, you can do things like that, but there is no custom graphics. There's none of this. It's all, think of it as what you can do with ASCII is what you can pretty much do in terms of extending Visual Studio Code, which sounds really lame to most people, including myself when I first heard that. But you think about it, they're really focused in on how you're going to code. So again, while they developed this sandbox and figured out how to do this properly for extensions and get that extension model down, they give you the basics. So we're going to run this, and you use Visual Studio Code to run Visual Studio Code. I'm actually going to do it from the debugger. So I'm going to do launch extension, and it opens up Visual Studio Code. It says, yep, I want to use internet. Let's go to OK. So where's my extension? Control-Shift-P. So that's what it's added. Nothing too crazy, right? Like this isn't quantum mechanics by any stretch. I enter this. Hello, Winnipeg.net. I know, you're all so impressed right now. I'm practically an IDE author at this point. Like, this is the first step. Next step is complete Visual Studio, I'm telling you. It's going to be trivial, a couple hours. But this is what I'm talking about when I say like it's limited in what you can do. But again, it's all customizable for all the guts, all the hard stuff that's really important to a project. Builds, tasks. So we have builds and tasks. We have basic integration like that. You can have stuff like, so you can think about it from a command point. Let's use Spotify as that bloody example exists. I don't know why. Then you have a series of commands that you can provide to people. So let's say you want to go to the next song. Great. Task, next song, enter. Bam. That's it. Your command palette is the only way you're really going to get input from your user. You can do stuff like, the extension I've been looking at is how to take a markdown file that has images in it that are on your local machine. So you referenced an image that is on your local pictures drive, and you want to change that so that it uploads it into IMGR, or the image repository site, and then replaces that link. Because someone might want to do that. It's totally possible. I've actually already mapped the whole thing out. It's totally doable. Because you can edit someone's code in line. You can say like delete this one line of code and replace it with this one, or do this thing, or execute whatever JavaScript you want in the background. No UI, but it's Node.js. So you can set up a request if you want. Like an async request, go, hey, upload this image. It'll upload it through the API, comes back down, success, all 17 images have been uploaded, and output that to the output window, or give me a little notification saying this was all successfully uploaded. Congratulations. You can automate all that stuff. You just got to get around the idea that you need a GUI. And I'll say this because I'm seeing it for myself. I'm not going to speak for anyone else here, but as someone who learned development strongly in the Visual Studio world and the Microsoft world, not having a GUI was not something I was familiar with by any stretch of the imagination. It was only about 3 years ago when I went to Summit with Amir, and I was all proud of myself because I was like, look how good I am with a terminal, and then he made fun of me essentially. Politely, but still made fun of me. Rightfully so, and it got me better at it, and that's why I appreciate this thing. This is a fancy thing. This is way better. I got into VI for a while, and I was like, this is good, but a little bit of sugar ain't gonna hurt me. And this is what that is, right? So you can write any extension you want. I'm looking at writing a couple for myself, specifically for the blogging stuff that we do at Western Devs, because we do a lot of markdown stuff, and that's where that solution came from. We don't want to host images on our blog, but we want to host them somewhere. And we wanted to figure that out. So Imager, it's called Imager. I think it's called Imager.
It's gotta be Imager.
Yeah, it's called Imager. So Imager is the spot where we started to upload things, but it became a pain in the butt. Where you have 6 images, upload them all manually, find those URLs, plunk them into write the text in Markdown. A Markdown image looks very standard. Parse that and go take that image, upload, and then replace that line of code. The API is all there. It's all really well documented. Just there's a lot because they have little nuances. You got to learn it's all JavaScript objects and learning the properties and learning all these things. And there's not a lot of people that have built these yet. They have a full debugger integration suite as well. That's where the Go debugger exists. You can integrate all that kind of stuff. I haven't explored that. You can integrate into the call stack from what I understand. You can do all this kind of weaving of parts together into Visual Studio Code. Again, clearly not trivial, but I mean, the average developer that I know hasn't been like, so what did you do yesterday? Well, I wrote a brand new extension for a compiler. It's like, what? Except for Amir. Amir's that guy. He does that every Tuesday for, fun. So, but that's extensions. And again, like I say, open source, and they're JavaScript and TypeScript based, and that's that. So, we're going to wrap it up here. Go back to the PowerPoint. Current slide. I'm learning how to use PowerPoint as we go here. It's pretty nice. So the points, just to recap real quick. So what Visual Studio Code is, first and foremost, it's a code editor. And that's the big thing. I know that Visual Studio proper and Eclipse and all those other ones are all code editors, but that's what defines this. The power of I open up Visual Studio and I don't generally write a lot of code. I use it for all of the other stuff that it does. Coding is actually a secondary feature for me in that I'd rather use a code editor or a text editor, and that's what this provides me. It's cross-platform, so again, it's Electron, so it's Mac, Linux, and Windows. Works great. Extensible and customizable, so hopefully we kind of covered some of that, so you can either customize your workspace, your projects, write brand new extensions, and share them with the community. It's fully open source and has rich support for C#-ish, coming soon, I suppose. But all the JavaScript stuff and Node stuff is all there, so it's pretty great. But what is it not? It's not a replacement for Visual Studio yet. Maybe one day it will.
If extensions can't do UI stuff, it never will be.
No.
And from what you've described, I'm not sure that VS Code wants to do that.
Well, I think that's the question. Is does the community want it? And maybe yes, maybe no. And I think they're listening very heavily to the user voice site they've set up for code, and they really watch that. Because one of the big pieces that people have demanded is code folding. It's not there yet. It is being looked at, and it's going to be code folding, the idea of like squishing a method together. So the little minus sign that shows up,
collapsing thing, yeah.
That's not a native feature for a lot of things. So that's not there yet, but a lot of people want it. And there's tricks to that. And how do you integrate that into my extension model? How do I worry about that for every language that exists and the ones that I've never looked at? Because code folding as a feature of the editor needs to just work. So how do we do that? And that's the stuff they're kind of looking at when they make a call. Do I think they'll get to the GUI side of it? I think they will, but I think it'll be limited, and I think that they have to figure out that sandbox model, because again, seeing how Atom works and how that just runs, I swear, it must be just sitting there chewing up, like, can I get the 2 gigs? Like, that must be what it does. Just, how many zeros can fit in this array? Like, that's pretty much how it's got to work, because I don't know what it could be doing. It's like a Java linter is taking up 2 gigs of memory, and it's just slow. But the other thing is it's not an all-in-one IDE. And you can make it an all-in-one IDE. If you wanted all the pieces you wanted to put in there, you could totally do it. You just got to be comfortable with what that provides. And again, you have to probably build a lot of those parts yourself. So I think they're going to see more stuff come out of it. Like I know there's a new a Microsoft Storage Explorer that's built again in Electron. But it's very limited. It just does blob storage, and that's fine. But I want a proper cloud manager. So I'm assuming you can see an extension for that, considering they've already built a big part of it in the same tech. Like it just makes sense to kind of have that stuff. That's a GUI component.
Yeah,
though.
but there's no UI extensibility.
That's what I mean by.
Code.
But that's my point, right? There's other projects that are the same, and they would be really easy to weave in as an extension if they had UI support. So I'm trying to figure out where, that's the question where it's at, and I don't think they're there yet. Considering they're really excited after a year to be like, we're in beta. Like, they're taking their time. It's a slow burn on this one. They want to make sure when they take the hit, they're gonna do it right. They're taking it really slow. So, last but not least, questions and conversations. Any thoughts or feedback is appreciated. We asked some great questions already, but are there any other outstanding questions? Because I do have some questions for you guys. Not a quiz, but it's a quiz. No, I'm just kidding. Just a couple of questions actually I have in terms of feedback.
So, what did you used to use for your JavaScript editing?
Sorry, I said it before.
What editor did you used to use before this?
Before this? I used VI actually from the terminal quite a bit because I would be stuck on a terminal and I'd be like, I'll just use this. This is fine. It just kind of works. The other one I used was Sublime Text. I used that for a little while. And I'm trying to think of what I used before that. I used Notepad++.
So I'm using Sublime right now, and I like all of the stuff you can do with JavaScript, specifically ESLint, being real time, for example. I don't have to wait for a step or anything.
So
like that.
Sublime Text, and I'm curious on where this is going to lead this, because this is clearly meant to be eventually direct competition. Sublime Text, for those of you that aren't familiar, is a very rich ecosystem as an editor. It's very well established. They really figured it out. But it costs, what, $70?
Right.
That's the weird part. GitHub kind of threw it down and said, hey, Atom's free. And then Microsoft's like, hey, we got a couple $1 billion of war chest sitting around. Like, why don't we make this free too while we're at it? And now there's this whole company built on $70, right? So
I think $70 for Sublime is worth it for Control Shift L. Like that,
Nope.
I would pay $70
Oh,
just for that.
this is where I think is an interesting point. I've heard that exact story from so many developers. I've never heard a developer give me the example about why they have to spend the $70 for the whole team on a big enterprise.
What's Control Shift L?
It gives you a cursor on every line that you have selected.
Yeah.
So while other editors will, you can hit Control Alt and down to give you more cursors in a line down from where you currently are.
Yeah.
This one will let you select an entire SQL file, for example, or an entire CSV file, for example. Hit Control Shift L and home, and now you have a cursor on every line at the beginning, and you go insert into control thing, whatever,
Okay.
and you know, type out all your columns.
Makes you really efficient.
Control
Yeah,
left,
yeah.
comma,
Yeah.
control left. So you can have
It's all about the shortcuts, for sure.
yes, you can have an SQL insert script in
Yeah, yeah.
like 17 keystrokes
Yeah.
as opposed to
Visual Studio proper does that. I use it a lot.
Yeah, but it still doesn't have the Control Shift L. I know what you're saying, but it has like
Hold down
control.
hold down
Yeah.
button, mouse.
Right. So if you have a line that's 1,000 lines long,
Oh yeah.
that's 1,000 key presses, or
Yep.
holding it down
Yeah,
until it
yeah.
hits 1,000 lines.
Gotcha.
Sublime, it doesn't matter. N is,
Yeah, guys
is
laughing
three
because-
is 3 key presses.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that too. But I mean,
Is what?
In VI, you do that with
Oh
many
God,
presses.
VI.
Yeah.
Why you got VI?
Every time I open it,
No,
I
no,
don't know how to get out of it for 20 minutes.
Sorry?
No.
Every time I open it, I don't know how to exit for like 20 minutes.
Control C, Control C, Control
That's like
C.
saying every time I grab a book in Mandarin, I don't know. Like,
Control C does not exit VI. I know that much.
No, it's semicolon or it's colon WQ.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's intuitive.
There you go. It is right because you want to save it first, then Q to quit, or you can do Q exclamation mark and just roll those dice and hope you didn't write anything important. So I've done that a couple of times. Where I'm like, I think I just saved over a really awesome config file that I shouldn't have saved over. No, I 100% agree, and I think you're right. I think that this is going to take some time to bake, and I don't think they'll never charge for this because this is clearly like we pointed out at the beginning. The point of this is to get people comfortable with that new Microsoft dev story, right? Where it's not platform specific. Because I know one of the things they did, the original Mac story for .NET Core before it was just called Project K for the Mac. They got an intern and they wrote a whole bunch of Sublime plugins. That was the Microsoft developer story. They did it as a demo, going like, you want to write for the Mac? Well, install all of our plugins for Sublime, and it's really easy. And they did it in about 2 seconds, right? And then they were writing C# files, and they were doing all this, and they ran it on a Mac about a year and a bit ago.
I remember,
Yeah.
some of those
So
plugins.
that was clearly their solution as well. This is, I really think this is that middle ground, because to go from like what you just said, like editing 1,000 lines with a series of keystrokes, or like they say VI, knowing how to use those keyboard commands and you never use your mouse, you become super productive. But for your, I'm not trying to stereotype it or label it, but your average Visual Studio developer, and I mean, I'm not trying to point out Dylan again. This is what I've seen with Visual Studio. No, the average Visual Studio developer uses the mouse to code as well. Like that's just the truth of it. Because you've been using Visual Studio, you file a new project, you start up with a mouse.
That's right.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's how people like that's how I learned for 5 years, and then I got out of code altogether and started relearning it all from scratch.
Well, I think that's what, if they're moving to other platforms, they're seeing that a lot of other platforms
Yep.
are based on Unix, which is based on files, which is
Yep.
based on the command lines. They're kind of taking that approach, it looks like, where they want to have tasks and commands and
Yep.
things that you pipe things into a window.
100%. And they're doing stuff like they're rewriting a lot of their servers that they're doing with ASP.NET. The stuff you're seeing with this is where they finally hit. Like what happened was ASP.NET realized, that being a web platform, they realized how far behind they were with web forms, and they started trying to iterate on that. And with ASP.NET 5, they kind of said like, we're going to make this new, and we're doing it from the ground up, cross-plat. And then I heard a really great description of it from someone. They specifically said, the ASP.NET team took the ball and they just started running really fast in the other direction. And they wanted to see how far they could get before corporate figured out what was going on. And they were like, and then with Release Candidate 1, they're like, what have you done? Like there's all these changes. Like what do you mean you got rid of CS project files? Like what? Like this is madness. So now they're trying to find that balance again, and there's going to be some give and take. But they're making it all cross-plat. They've sold that on a lot of people, and a lot of people are seeing the value in just using things like JSON and regular stuff that, like you say, Unix-based, put it in a folder and it just kind of runs. You shouldn't need all this magic stuff. But there's a lot, you think about their whole product line, there's a lot of challenges. Like think about taking SharePoint, applying this to this model. Like SharePoint is that Microsoft developer story. And it's just like, yeah, let's just make it a folder. So I do file, open a new folder and just write SharePoint and just see what happens. Like that would be all kinds of madness. So that's why it's a slow burn, I think.
Yeah, well, that group of Microsoft, which does all this stuff, right? What they were saying to me at Summit is their strategy used to be, we make tools for people that write apps for the Windows platform. Obviously, they're changing it. Now their philosophy is everywhere where development is happening, we want Microsoft tools to be there in some form.
Yep.
And they're trying to figure out what that looks like.
Well, and that's the thing, like, being I guess now I don't know what my title is, but I'm an Internet Explorer MVP. So I deal with a lot of JavaScript people. I'm a JavaScript dev. And they did a really great demo of Visual Studio 2 years ago. And they said, here's all the new tools. Here's how we link the browser. Here's browser link. And they showed this big thing, and it was like amazing demo. And then the first question that was asked goes, why would I use any of this? And he goes, well, why? He's like, I've never opened Visual Studio once. Like, why would any of this matter? Like, I can do all that in the browser. And it was just this moment of like, this guy, it was Mads Christensen or whatever that guy's name is, the guy that does all the speaking for the .NET tools for ASP.NET. That was the guy doing the demo, and they just said like, yeah, your stuff looks cool. I just never use it because I can do it all in the F12 browser tools. And then they kind of like, that kind of shut it all down.
You have, right?
What's that?
That's the competition. You have to be proactive.
Yep. Well, and that's the piece, right? So there's the two sides of that coin, right? They want to convince. They also said like the younger generation of coders, the people that are learning the different languages and stuff, they want to bring those people in to use C# and the .NET and the Microsoft tools, but they also don't want to anger all the people that have been using it in the enterprise and stuff for the last 10, 15 years. There's a balance there, and it's a very, very different audience, right? The average Node developer, like, does anyone here work for Skip the Dishes? Like, I met those guys, and like, it almost infuriated me to see like these guys that I'm like, I'm pretty confident you just finished high school. Like they look so young, these guys. And this is like, that's that trendy Facebook looking developer, right? Like wearing a hoodie and being like, hey, we got this startup and it's awesome. And we wrote it all in Node. Like there's no one ever saying, hey, got this trendy new startup and I'm wearing a hoodie and I wrote it all in Visual Studio and TFS. Like no one's saying that. I've never heard that, at least not in 10 years. So. It's big enterprise.
You blew up probably your money in the first 2 months.
First 2 months,
Yeah.
all your angel investment has gone on 2 licenses and you're done.
Well,
Again, different audience though.
Well, even at the ALM group, Microsoft, right? At Summit, they're telling us that they're worried about that too. They're worried that they're missing like the hip new generation of coders who are using different tools. And in our ALM group, the average age is fairly old because junior people aren't ALM guys.
Yeah.
Right, so Brian Harry, the guy who runs the group,
Yep.
He was kind of joking to us. He's like, next year at Summit, there's going to be an admittance fee, and that fee is you have to bring a developer under 30 with you, because they're afraid they're getting tunnel vision. And all our
Yep.
ALM MVPs tend to be fairly older too. So
It's been been the story. They've targeted the enterprise for years. And it's not like they can just, and in all fairness, like they're not going to be like, if you imagine you take this team that's been doing this thing for 10, 15 years, and you say, so tomorrow we're all going to be doing Ruby, and it's just like. What? Like that team is dead. Like the whole division is just gone out of Microsoft after that. Like you can't just flip that switch. So this is that middle ground. So to get like people that are using Sublime Text and being like, hey, like would you look at this? And it's like, yeah, but I pay my $70 to get that major feature. And they're like, okay. And I don't doubt that based solely on how this thing looks and feels, I don't doubt in a minute, like in the next year, you're going to see that feature show up and they're like, hey, we made this really cool. Because they have all the HTML Zen stuff built into it as well already. So you can do a lot of quick writing of HTML. Not the same thing, I realize, but they're kind of appealing to that audience too, where it's how productive can I be with just a keyboard. I'm going over time here, 7:30, so I'm going to pack up. So if you have any questions, feel free to come up. And like I said, this will be on YouTube if you want to recap and be all like, hey, we should all use Visual Studio Code at work now, because we can use it with Java apparently. But if you have any questions, feel free to come up and ask. And otherwise, I'll see you at Code Camp. So thanks.